I did not buy a single textbook in college.
Interesting.
And I did my entire senior year of high school without any textbooks.
So how did were they giving you assignments without the textbook, or how did you?
No, I mean, so it's a good question. A lot of the time, I would self study and then show up for the test and kind of hope that I knew enough.
This is another episode of the Automate and Grow podcast. My guest today is Slater Victoroff, as opposed to Victor Slateroff, which apparently people call him. And he is the co-founder of Indico, and they are a process automation platform. So first of all, Slater, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's great to be here.
Okay, so what is Indico?
So Indico is an intelligent automation company that really focuses on giving knowledge workers that are doing a lot of really manually intensive day-to-day document based processes, giving them access to kind of modern machine learning tools to help them automate their own jobs on a day-to-day. If you think about invoice processing, if you think about contract analysis, we are, a modern deep learning powered tool that puts the power to build these ML models in the hands of the subject matter experts, allows data scientists to act as architects as opposed to individual contributors, and helps the organization execute on unstructured workflows much more effectively.
So how did the company get started?
It's a good question. So the company was started very literally back in a dorm room at Olin College. Me and my original co-founder, Alec Radford, started doing Kaggle competitions together. This was about 7-8 years ago, so Kaggle was just getting started. And I remember for the first 6 months, we were competing on a team constantly, and we were seeing really good success with these very traditional ML models, right? Massive regressions on TF-IDF vectors. And what happened was after the first 6 months, things really started to change really, really radically. We started to see that, especially for image-based competitions, that these deep learning techniques that I frankly had completely written off at that point started really coming to their own. A lot of really significant results sort of came into the fore. And after a few months of this, I kind of, realized that I was wrong. Earlier in that year, I had actually said to one of my professors, the war is over, deep learning lost. This was, 2012.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, this was 2012. So it wasn't a strange opinion to have. But, obviously I'm eating crow in a big way now. and that was really the genesis of Indico, is how can we make this technology more accessible? And we started life as a developer API and have moved towards enterprise software and really empowering the non-technical business user over our lifetime.
So for people that don't know, what you're talking about is a subset of artificial intelligence or a methodology to come up with an intelligent system. Is that a good way to describe it?
Yep.
So you were doing more theoretical work, but then you figured out a business application, it sounds like.
I would say that in some ways that's true. I think one thing that's particularly interesting, and I'll do a small shout out to my school here, Olin College. It's a very small engineering school, about 15 years old, about 80 kids per class. Yep. And one thing that they do is they focus really heavily on the intersection of really difficult technical problems and user design. And while I would definitely say that Indico has always been on the very forefront of difficult problems, at no point would I have characterized our work as highly theoretical. It's just that it was harder and harder, and it's become more practical, and we've gotten better at it over time.
I see.
As sort of an engineer first rather than an academic, maybe.
And it's Olin's College, is that what it's called?
Olin, O-L-I-N.
O-L-I-N. And where is that? Is it also in Massachusetts area?
Yep. It's in Needham, about 14 miles west of Boston.
Oh, very interesting. Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to look at this because first of all, that's a very specific area that's high in demand, right? Like if you're, and for such a new college, that's kind of a interesting story. So
It's a really, really special place. I think that Olin has, their main claim to fame is they do an entirely project-based education. So, Oliners they're doing internships and they're building real apps, right? And so by the time they graduate, they almost look like someone with 3 to 5 years of experience, and they force every engineer to basically get a design minor.
Okay, I'm super pumped to hear about this. So this was like an unexpected little discovery.
Happy to help. It's a really cool place. They're actually, I won't say too much about this. They're playing around with a new model for college that will stay robust through a pandemic.
Yeah, so not to deflect from what you're doing with Indico, because I do want to talk about that, but it's interesting what you've brought up, because I'm kind of a vocal proponent of saying, first of all, we have this test-taking culture in high school that leads to a test-taking culture in university. It's, a fake measurement, and it's causing a whole bunch of bad incentives and problems. And then you also have a university system that is not merit-based, but is what tenure-based and publishing-based, right? And so there's pressure to publish to get grants and money. Yep. And what I keep advocating, and what I think the guy that's come up with the best model so far that I've read, or at least paper, is Peter Diamandis, who did the X Prize, which is where all the whole space races come out of, right? And the model he advocates for, I think, is closer to what I'm envisioning, which is saying, listen, let's smash this education model. Let's break test-taking culture. And it's like, if you went into high school and they said, every year you're going to have one major project. And the major project is you either start a business, an investment fund, a nonprofit, you do an internship, or you always have an internship or an apprenticeship.
I mean, that would always be awesome.
Yeah. Right? And at the end of 4 years, if you came out of it with 4 of those, who's better off?
See, I think I really agree, and I think one of the things that's so tough, right? I remember this article from several years ago, recently after they had deployed the No Child Left Behind Act, and it was about the worst teacher in America, and she was an advanced math teacher in New York, and she says, "This is ridiculous. The problem is that I am teaching Calc 2. And all of my students are 10th graders, and then they go and take the standardized test that is math that they were learning 6 years ago."
Wow.
Right? So it's this incredibly, I think, poorly time-aligned piece. Students really don't have a lot of flexibility, I think, to pursue things that are more aligned with their interests.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
We're giving this very generalist education. And then in each of those silos, there's also very bad incentives, and particularly around math, which drives me nuts.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have the mentality that math was hard for me to learn, so I'm going to make it hard for you to learn.
Well, and
it doesn't have to be that way.
It should not be. I mean, not to go off on a tangent, but you're kind of in the same space, because I think this is very important, because what we're doing is we're creating generation after generation of people that think math is voodoo. And it's like intimidating.
It's really disheartening.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, it's reason. Like I understand why, having seen a lot of these. I thought I was bad at math for most of my school experience. It took me until I was 16 years old until I realized that what they were teaching me in class was supposedly what was in the textbook. And at that point, I realized I could just read the textbook, and I was acing every test after that. But the fact that it took me 16 years to figure out that they were even aligned, I think really, really does say something.
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of bad, again, incentives in that system. One is, you just mentioned it, the textbook. And Bill Gates, I think, of all, regardless of what we think of Windows and Bill Gates, he's the guy that I think highlighted this for me, which is, why is the US textbook this thick and the one in Taiwan is this thick? And what Taiwan is number 1 in outcomes for math, and the US is like 27th. What am I missing? Yep. He goes, we have to break the textbook cartel. Now, he may have a bit of an incentive around this, but the point is they want to keep selling textbooks, first of all.
No, I mean, I think it's also just the classic case of like a poorly constructed market, right? So here's you want to know my secret admission. I did not buy a single textbook in college.
Interesting.
And I did my entire senior year of high school without any textbooks.
So were they giving you assignments without the textbook, or how did you?
No, I mean, so it's a good question. A lot of the time, I would self-study
Yeah.
and then show up for the test and kind of hope that I knew enough, and
Man,
it
you sound
worked
like me.
pretty well.
Because I did the same thing, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
And I think, you know, it was crazy because when I got to university, I dropped out after a while because I was like, this is worse than it was before. I went there to, you know, I
Right.
thought it was going to solve the problem I had in high school, which is this is not here to teach me. This is here. And I think I had good teachers and I think I had a good high school experience overall. It was in Canada, by the way.
Got it.
So I think it's probably better than I would have had here. But it
Yeah,
still was a problem for me personally because I was like, listen, I'm not going to class. I'm not going to take the textbook home and do any of the homework. I'll show up at the test. I'll do the projects and I'm just going to get what I need to get into the University of Waterloo. And that's what I did.
yeah.
And then when I got to the University of Waterloo, I was like, wow, this is like the same problem again because the textbooks are junk. Like
I
what
mean, the way that so the way that I thought about it, right, when I was going out and looking at colleges, right, because I had sort of exactly the way that I had framed it is I realized I could either go to class or I could learn, right, and they were sort of mutually exclusive.
So crazy you say this.
And I assumed that that was going to be the case forever. And so I was going to, you know, all these colleges and assuming, I think, you know, like a lot of people do, that really I was going to, you know, never go to class and just show up for the test. And, you know, sort of really looking for a school that would do that.
Yeah.
And one thing that actually, when I showed up at Olin for their candidates weekend to kind of tour there, I withdrew my application to every other school that I had applied to.
Oh, wow.
Because Olin was the first time that I ever saw that I could learn and go to school at the same time. The school was actually set up to support me learning. Where the thing that is really, really funny, right, is that when you opt for a project-based education, when you're picking, hey, here is the project that I want to go do, almost always students are going to overestimate what they're capable of, right? I mean, you're like new in the field, you kind of like point at something, and it's going to be too hard 9 times out of 10. You know, the professor helps to kind of massage it, but when you shoot for something beyond your capabilities and you know you opted into it and your problem is just work to get there and you've got professors as resources to get there, it was an incredible opportunity. I mean, I think the way that I also dropped out, but it's not because I didn't love Olin. It's because Olin really did its job too well and kind of set me off, just happened to happen before I graduated.
Yeah. And I kind of went that path and it's not that I'm a phenomenal entrepreneur, but it's more, I was like frustrated by what you just described. And it's bizarre because I don't think a lot of people understand that to that, why they're going for an accreditation. And I was like, I don't feel the need for this. Like I'm trying to actually learn and build stuff. And so it's interesting you say that because now you have this phenomenal startup that's doing, trying to solve a big problem. And you're using a very complex, to most people, what a complex technology is to get there. And I've been, building everyone's platform and app and then get into sales and marketing automation. And it's not like I'm a computer science guy, right? But I have the mind where I understand models and I'm creating my own system of learning. So I can totally relate to what you're saying, but it frustrates me seeing that there's this broken methodology that people just keep buying into because they're getting badges.
Yeah. And I think it's also very tough just because I think that the rate of improvement is very, very slow. It takes 10, 20 years to get the curriculums up to date. Right.
Yeah. Well, it never will be up to date.
Exactly. It will always be 10 to 20 years behind.
Yeah. And curriculum is a flawed method. So I think it's interesting.
I think to your competency-based approaches are a lot more interesting.
That's why apprenticeship, internship, mentorship projects make a hell of a lot more sense than
full agreement.
Creating this system where you have to sit in there in this equivalent to a one-room schoolhouse, absorb the information, show me on a test repeatedly that you have some knowledge and I'll grade you according to that. And then I get rated according to how you do. And then you're going to go into a system that's that times 10 and read this crappy textbook that is not in a vernacular that matters.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I
So
think it's
frustrating.
yeah, it's crazy how there are great textbooks out there, but they're not the like classic blockbuster Pearsons. They're, these random O'Reilly books, right? That someone that just loves the space built. Like how many college courses are taught on the back of those? I mean, it is changing, right? I mean, I
Is
think,
it?
to call it, yeah, there are absolutely schools out there, Urbana-Champaign, right? I think University of Toronto is doing pretty well here,
Really?
right? WPI, yep. I mean, granted, these are all limited
U of T, shout out
experiments.
to U of T there, but
I mean, a lot of people don't realize this. U of T and University of Montreal are,
on
and NYU with a third. Those are the top 3 universities in the world in ML.
is
Yeah,
it really over Waterloo?
yeah, I mean, Waterloo is also very good. I mean, and I will also say that sort of comparison it's maybe a little dated. That's where the 3 giants, Jan LeCun,
Yeah,
Joshua Bengio, and Jeffrey
they're
Hinton
just
came
so
from.
big.
But
Like,
yeah, no, there
yeah.
are certainly a lot of universities today that are doing interesting work. I mean, Waterloo is certainly up there. There's a lot in Europe, but I think people underestimate how lacking the U.S. The U.S. sort of leads in university education in almost every field. And on the industry side in the US, that's true for AI. But on the university side, it's not that there aren't good universities in the US. It's just
Yeah.
we're nowhere near as dominant in AI as we are in other fields.
I think it's, you have probably the best of the best, or these pockets, right? And everyone else is kind of doing generalized stuff and they don't attract the top people. It's probably, I would say that overall the education model in these other countries, including Germany or Canada, is a lot stronger. It's got a little bit
Yeah.
of a foundation in either baccalaureate or in UK based education. It kind of derives from that, so that's probably part of the strength. Whereas here again, like there's weird incentives around textbooks and publishing and stuff that has nothing to do with outcomes.
Yeah, one of the things I think is really interesting is also if you look at Singapore and Finland are to me sort of the, that is the education conundrum, is that their 2 systems could not be more different.
Right.
And yet in terms of outcomes, they're 1 and 2, right? Is, Singapore has taken sort of this regimented, extremely test-centric view, and they, granted, they have changed a lot of things about it, right? It looks very, very different from the US system. Whereas Finland is, you're hiking in the woods every day, right? And the fact that, things that look to us to be so radically different kind of get you to a similar place in outcomes is, it tells me that there's a lot about education that we still don't quite understand.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways, we're still in the dark ages from that perspective.
Again, I think it's the more you try to control it and put structures in place that are consistently for measurement, that's causing the problem, because you're trying to create silos instead of trying to make it individualized. So anyways, not to go off on that tangent.
No, I mean, I talked about this stuff
for
I worked for Pearson and edX. I actually worked in EdTech
okay.
before Indico, so I'm super into this subject.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's important. I would love to. I will follow up on Olin and talk to you about Olin, because I'm actually very interested in that and learning more about them. Okay, so getting back to your business, so I apologize for that. So you're, it's interesting because you've come out of like this very practical education, and that was the foundation for you taking an element of AI or AI itself and trying to solve a business problem. But you're doing a very kind of traditionally like not fun thing, right? Like it's not like you have a startup that's based around social media. It's an enterprise business with a really annoying problem that relates to legal and accounting.
Yeah, I guess that is a way to look at it for sure. I mean, it's funny. Honestly, I did it the wrong way around, right? I think what I did is the absolute opposite of the right way to make a company, right? The right way to make a company, I would have picked a user group that I uniquely understood, really dove in and kind of backwards solved for things. And I'll fully admit, I fell in love with the technology, right?
Cool.
What I really saw is that there was this incredibly new technology that I think people really didn't appreciate how revolutionary it was at the time, right? So deep learning driven transfer learning and NLP, which is kind of our really specific niche. As of 18 months ago, everyone realizes, this is where to be, that's BERT and that's GPT, right? But I've been working on it for 7 years.
Wow.
Right.
So yeah, you're early on something that was really right. I mean, it's at a weird inflection point where you're like, okay, there's enough people that now understand this is a way to solve problems.
It's great. It's so awesome. I mean, we've kind of taken several steps beyond that. But I think, I don't know, it was very, very gratifying to see. And I think that on the technology side, it was definitely a place where I found the most interesting combination of user experience and machine learning technologies, and said, I know for certain this is a new capability that is not really possible today, but I see where, this is the technology that's going to advance very, very quickly, and I want to skate towards where the puck is going. And, then, and we missed sort of the first time on where is this technology most useful. We did a lot of experiments in a lot of different shapes. And so it took us a long time to figure out that this sort of enterprise data engine for unstructured, right, was really, I think, the winning solution.
Interesting. So where are you at in the venture?
Yeah, so we're roughly a Series B company. We're about 30 folks, projected to grow to roughly 70 by the end of next year.
Wow, phenomenal! That's great.
Yeah, we've got a really nice portfolio of companies across the Fortune 1000, primarily BFSI, with some variation in that. We've got a mature product, a mature customer base. We have been on the Gartner hype cycle for the last several years, and we're named a Gartner Cool Vendor as well. So things are great.
That's
things are
amazing.
Going awesome.
Yeah. I think you're at a very early point in your journey. So this is pretty exciting stuff. So how do we get non-data scientists to create more ventures around AI?
I think that the biggest misconception that people have about AI is that it is a data science problem. There are incredible researchers out there doing very, very good work on sort of the pure science side of AI, right? I mean, Google and Facebook and OpenAI, they're doing really, really great work, and
Right.
Too many people to mention. But I think what people miss is just how far that technology is from practical application. I think that people underestimate just how significant it can be to effectively work not in the traditional academic framing, but have a really user-centric framing that you can kind of, get that interesting technical negotiation going with, okay, what if this new technology kind of empowers something new for the user experience, right? One example I'll just use, which I think is, it's a tough example, but I think a good one, is bias in AI, right? People point to all of these great examples, right? They point at the Amazon bias resume reviewer. And I think it's a perfect example because the immediate intuition is, okay, that's a modeling problem, right? And so they say, okay, how are we going to change the model to account for that? But they tried that, right? They threw dozens and dozens of PhDs at the problem for years before they just threw up their hands and they're like, this is not possible. There's no way to solve this problem. And it's because these systems are really intelligent parrots, right? The problem was that there's no way you can change the model to eliminate this bias, because the bias only exists in the data that or only exists is maybe a bit of a strong word, right? But when that bias exists in that data, you can't massage it out with a model, right? You have to figure out, actually, from a non-technical perspective, how do we craft what unbiased looks like and actually address that problem, as opposed to saying, oh, it's a math issue, because it's not a math
Why do we need unbiased? Because this is my question. Does this not prove that biases are how people make decisions?
I mean, it absolutely does prove that.
Because machines are making decisions that way, whether we try to retrain them or not.
Well, I mean, the thing to realize, right, is that they're just parrots, right? So the only thing that we should think of when we look at AI is this is a mirror being held up to our face. So, you're absolutely correct. The only thing that biased machines tell us is that humans make biased decisions, right?
You have to.
And I think,
like, if you're unbiased, you get to a terrible decision.
Well, I think that there's not really a definition of unbiased, right? And I think that's one of the problems, is that we use bias as this massive umbrella for like any problem with model, like the Amazon resume reviewer, right? Yeah. It immediately rejected anyone from Smith College. Now, Smith is an incredible college, right? That was just a random weird quirk of the data, right? And it happens, right? And so it's really about having to understand, like, okay, well, which biases are appropriate, which aren't, how do we characterize it, right? And what's acceptable and what's not. Because I think we can all, we can all immediately see, okay, if I've got a facial recognition system that people are using for policing and it misidentifies, people of a particular race with, 10 times the rate, like, okay, that is obviously a problem. You don't have to convince anyone of that. But, I think that most of the interesting problems are more at the margin here, right? They're things like, okay, I'm going to certainly have certain biases in here, and it might not be obvious which way they lean. So really, how do we just make sure that, in the biases we're building, we're not screwing anyone over? Frankly.
Yeah. I mean, but there's, maybe it's definitely interesting problem to me. And I look at it not from anything other than biases have become the new pseudoscience for that people don't really understand them. They're using them for their own agenda and their own view of the world. But the truth is, it's part of how our brains work.
Yeah, I mean,
and the demonstration of that is now you're digitizing how a brain works.
I don't think that's a fair characterization of AI to like digitize how a brain works, right?
It's decision processing, don't you think?
Well, yeah, but those are two very different things, right?
They?
Like it is learning things, but again, like it's a mirror is maybe even better than a parrot, just because like don't think that these things are sentient, right? They are really just reflectors. Maybe you can think of them as a mirror that's got some pock marks in it, right? So they have a tendency to kind of ignore certain pieces and focus other pieces a little bit unpredictably.
That makes sense. And you mentioned NLP, and for people that don't know, that's there's two NLPs in the world, by the way, which are kind of
goodness. One is straight up pseudoscience.
Is it?
Neuro-linguistic programming.
Well, it's used as pseudoscience as well, I think. But there's an
no, I think there is realistic pieces, but it's also like if you use these particular words, you will open your chakra and ascend to the next.
No, that's nonsense. But the thing about neuro-linguistic programming that is real is modeling.
That's natural language processing.
Well, that's also natural language processing. But if you talk to Wyatt Woodsmall, who's an expert in NLP, he's the only guy that ever said it in a way that makes any sense to me, because everyone else it was nonsense. But he's like, look, all it is modeling, which is figuring out why an expert is actually successful and then duplicating that. That's the way he uses it. I'm like, that's actually the other NLP, but that's what he has stated NLP is, which is, that's what I was like, well, that's natural language processing in my head, but that's how look up Wyatt Woodsmall. He's a really interesting guy. I actually would love to have him on the podcast, but
that's interesting. I've not ever heard a definition like that. That's not the kind of NLP that I know.
No, it's usually like Tony Robbins or some sales thing or something weird, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I would love to have him on. Actually, he's an older dude now, but he's so smart. Like, it's crazy. Because if you look up NLP modeling and Wyatt Woodsmall, and I was like, whoa, that's the same. That's why I say they're very connected. If you look at what his model of neuro-linguistic programming is modeling successful behavior and making it repeatable. And I'm like, well, that's neuro-linguistic programming, which is
word.
Yeah.
Okay. Got But that is a different thing.
True. Yeah. So anyways,
it's not related to the kind of NLP that I do.
Yeah. And the NLP you do is
natural language processing,
right? And I think of it in the terms of the way I try to describe it to people, but you'd probably be better than I would, is it's kind of like a conversation. Is that a good way to, and because it's a way to learn, right?
No, that's not right. Sorry. So it's a very broad term, natural language processing, right? So it doesn't mean really anything in particular.
Okay.
The only thing it means is it's basically any AI system that touches text, that's natural language processing, right? And, there are traditional problems in the natural language processing umbrella, like sentiment analysis, figuring out, is this text positive or negative, right? Document understanding, what's the total on this receipt, things like that. But it's sort of all NLP. Like, think of NLP as something at the same level as computer vision, which is just anytime a computer is looking at an image. NLP is anytime a computer is looking at text.
Got it. Okay. Because I probably took it I was thinking in the context of how chatbots work, I think.
Yep. Yeah. I mean,
And
that
how
is a
people
common application for sure.
got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So I probably extrapolated that from that, which is it's examining language in the context of some assumption or problem it's trying to solve. Is that kind of the idea?
That, yeah, generally, again, it's broad, but very typically, you've got some particular problem you're trying to solve with text as input. In terms of how it learns, that's actually one of the things that's really interesting and has changed a lot over the last just 2 years. It used to be, and just use Twitter sentiment analysis, for example. I want to train something to read a tweet, figure out if it's positive or negative. It used to be that the way you do that is you find a whole bunch of tweets, right? You label, 10 million of them, right? You feed them to, a big model that eventually figures out how to discern between them. And what has actually happened recently is that we've gotten a lot better at sort of leveraging intelligence between tasks in the same model. So the idea here is that rather than training something on 10 million tweets, what you could do now is say, hey, or 10 million labeled sentiment tweets. You can just say, all right, read a bunch of Twitter, sort of figure out what it looks like generically. Then I'll give you 100 tweets and figure it out from there, right? And that's called transfer learning generically. And that has been really, really successful. If you look at sort of GPT and BERT, that's how all of them learn, is sort of looking at these massive unsupervised corpuses of language such that they can learn specific problems much more quickly from a data perspective.
Got it. And then in your context, it's because you're dealing with invoices and contracts, which have, how do I put it?
Text.
It's text, but the problem of what that text means in a contract is this is what you get, and this is what should happen, and this is what you pay. So there's like real world consequences of that text, right?
Absolutely.
And you're trying to extract that so that's meaningful and it's not hidden in a PDF somewhere that someone has to read and interpret.
Exactly. So really, and you can think any place you're going from unstructured data like a contract to structured data, right? A couple of columns or checkboxes that you need to fill out. That's really where Indico slots in very well.
Got it. Yeah, and that's a huge problem, right? Because
I
think, we're signing even electronic documents, we're signing that require us to do stuff, right?
Yeah.
So to find that out, if you're not putting it in a format like a record in a system, right? Let's call it CRM. Let's call it, accounting, ERP, whatever.
Yeah, wherever you're putting it.
People then have to go back to the paper, read it as a human being, which is a very analog way to do.
Yeah, and it's exhausting and it's error prone and I'll tell you one other thing. People have very individual understandings of the process, right? Very often, if you have 3 people looking for a similar sort of clause, where they draw the line on what looks close enough to include or not, it'll be close. It's almost never going to be the same. And so that's one of the other places that we actually slot in really effectively, is this idea where you want to go from a bunch of individuals that do this process and have an individual understanding to really an encoded organizational level understanding that is consistent.
Yeah, so that's a huge problem that probably affects every single business.
Probably, I think, yeah, in some form or another, absolutely.
If you're signing contracts and you're generating invoices.
Yeah, if you've got, purchase orders, if you are reading news articles and figuring out information about it, right? It's really, we like to talk about it like a bionic arm for the knowledge worker.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Because I think it's like, another person that's been on the podcast is my friend Zavia Bader. Her company's called Trajectory. And the problem she solved with AI in a similar way is cancer. And if you think about it, the way doctors diagnose and prescribe is they, in part, read a lot of FDA articles.
Absolutely.
So the bottleneck, again, is an analog way of taking that knowledge and then applying it to many patients. And there's, you see a cancer doctor like 30 to 60 minutes if you add it up. Right? It's a very small aspect. You're doing tests, you're communicating how you're feeling, and then he's quickly interpreting based upon something he's read and tries to remember.
Yeah.
Whereas AI solves that problem very well, which is it can help be an advocate for the patient. That's kind of the similar to what you're doing, where you're reading contracts and saying, this is what you're entitled to, and this is what then you can figure out what you've used against it or delivered or not delivered. That's kind of what you're doing. And
yeah, that's certainly an application.
Similar, where their AI is reading and mastering FDA documents on tests. They're looking at trials, and they're looking at treatments and outcomes, and then saying these are the best scenarios based upon your situation, right?
Yeah,
got it. Interesting, complex. Anyways, I use it as
absolutely. I mean, I think it's an intensely interesting space, right? I think it's the kind of thing where the more you think about this knowledge problem, right, kind of the more multifaceted it becomes, and sort of the deeper it goes. Where I actually thought you were going to go on the cancer side is sort of cancer screening on, visual scans and things along those lines.
Oh, that's another, yeah.
Yeah, one of the reasons I like that analogy, or, one of the reasons I described it as a bionic arm, specifically in contrast to sort of an android that stands by your side. Because I think people often think about AI as, it's this, it's an android worker next to a human worker, and it's a certain percent as effective as the human, and, X% faster. But I think really the better model for it is that, humans and machines, they're just good at different things, right? And that's fine. That's great, right? Build a product that leverages both of them in the right context to get more effective outcomes.
Totally. I think of it in terms like of either decision support.
Mm-hmm. But it's like decision support versus decisioning. I think decision support is so much better than decisioning.
Exactly.
Because like the second you get to decisioning, you raise all of these really tough questions of, where are we going to be wrong? How bad is that going to be? Right. And you end up wanting a human to check it anyway. So if you just say, like, look, humans can make the decision, give them all the information they need to quickly make it as well as possible.
There you go. And I think that's what we want to see is more people that are not just math-based people, understanding that these are the constructs of AI and the elements. And here's the tools that are out there, because there's APIs like Watson APIs, there's OpenAI, there's AWS. And what I look at it as is, okay, 10 years ago, everybody had an app idea. Today, everyone needs to come up with an AI idea, not with the limitation of the math or how to build the system as the bottleneck. If you're an entrepreneur and you're a non-technical founder, you hit it on the head. Think of the user experience and the problem that's very, very complex, but it would be great if it was solved in a very fast and better than guessing way.
Totally. I think that's one of the reasons a lot of the AWS and Watson style APIs are ultimately not going to be successful, or sort of why Watson really hasn't been successful to date, right?
True.
I think often their framing of the problem is, I want to make sort of this black box that you can plug in very, very easily. And it solves a part of the problem, but to your point, right? The user wants to turn AI into something they're fluent with and can actually use productively, right? As opposed to just buy and plug in, because again, that sort of raises a whole host of questions, and it ends up feeling really constricting to the user. So I think that there's going to be a whole host of, Gartner calls it the citizen data scientist, right? And these are platforms really to sort of enable non-technical people to do real data science work.
Yeah, and I think that's what the promise of those are, and they may not look like that in 5-10 years.
No, I think it's the promise, and I hope they get further along that road. Hopefully. I think they're very early.
Yeah, and it might be something else, like I believe that someone else like you will come up with a way that this is the AI iOS.
Right? I mean, I like to think we've got a better approach to it. Well, no, absolutely. Yeah. It's this engine that allows you. It's a consistent way of operationalizing these models, right? And building these models where it's not sort of a one-off from, the wizened old man in the background shouting Eureka, right? Like this has to be turned into a scalable operational process at these companies.
Absolutely. Listen, I want to be conscious of your time. We've gone over, I could geek out all day with you on this stuff. I want to acknowledge you for the work that you're doing and the problem that you're solving. I'm going to wrap up with 2 quick questions. One is, how are you, Slater, changing the world?
I'm changing the world by plotting a responsible and effective course forward for AI. It's a very, very difficult technical problem, and there are significant opportunities if we get it right, and there's significant problems if we get it wrong. And I am doing my little part to keep us pointed in the right direction and focused on the problems that I really think we should be solving.
I love it. And how do people get in touch with you?
Slater at indico.io. I got a Twitter, I got a LinkedIn. I'm the only Slater CTO in Boston. So if you Google that, I promise you'll find me.
That's great. All right. So the final thing is, when we have interesting people on the podcast, we like you to nominate other interesting people. We typically talk to experts or entrepreneurs about person they're helping and problems they're solving. So, and usually the first person that pops your mind is the best, but not limited to that. So who would you, Slater, like to nominate as a future guest of Automate and Grow?
I mean, I'd nominate my co-founder, Diane Yuan. I think that she's incredible. And I think that she has really made herself a pillar of the Boston startup ecosystem.
Awesome. All right. So Diane, you've been nominated by Slater to be a future guest of Automate and Grow. Thank you, Slater, for spending so much time with me. Hopefully you didn't go off on too many tangents.
No, it was a lot of fun.
I'll come back anytime. I'm sure there's other topics we can delve into, and I definitely want to look into Olin.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. Have a great day, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right. This has been another episode of the Automate and Grow podcast. We will see you in a future episode, hopefully with Diane of Automate and Grow.